Hey, seventh graders, Mr. Allard here. Talking with another, sort of a weird version of a flip lesson. Seeing that you're in the classroom and I am not today, but I wanted to make sure to provide you the notes today and kind of walk you through a couple of things to make sure we're all on the same page. You should have your chapter one, or chapter eight, section one packet. It's a yellow packet. It's got a picture of kind of a ship in the front. You should have already completed OTA number 30. So today we're going to complete our notes. I'll talk a little bit more about this packet when I see you guys on Friday. Um, you should also get your packet for chapter 8, section 2. Uh, if you're in the classroom today. If not, you will get that on Friday. If you are at home, if you're a fully remote student, or if you weren't in class on Friday and didn't pick up your packet, you can get your notes on Schoology. And here I'll show you from our um, class, our second block class here. Let me just make myself a little smaller here. There we go. Go to the Schoology page. Ooh, looks like we got some new stuff. So we should be in the. Ooh, just want to make sure everything is in the screen. We should be in this chapter 8, creating the Constitution. You'll see a section 2, but we're not doing anything with that today. You're probably not going to get through all of this today, so don't feel like you have to rush to do so. We didn't get through all of it on Monday. All you have to do is click on your section, and then right here is your section notes, all right, that you can follow along with this. I would recommend having 2 tabs open. That's a much easier way. And then here's our next. We didn't get to our number 4 in any of our classes yesterday. Here's your scenarios. And again, use your notes to help you with any of these things after that. But without further ado, let's get going with our PowerPoint. There it is. This is a little bit of a lengthier PowerPoint. I apologize. I will try not to have PowerPoints as long in the future. Um, just because I'm trying to figure out typically how we would do this. It is much different, but with the COVID restrictions and with some classes having 12 students in the classroom at a time, some students have 4 kids and 2 kids. It's tough to kind of have everything be the same for everybody when we work on it. But we're going to go through the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were our first start of government. It gets kind of a bad rap because it's our first government, which means it didn't work. But I don't think, and I don't think any historians would argue that it didn't work for lack of trying. I just think, and many historians would also agree that there was some things that were just built in the Articles of Confederation that didn't work as a result of really what was going on in that time period. So, for example, one thing the Articles of Confederation did not have is it did not have an executive or a president. Okay, there was no single leader in our national government. And what we're going to talk through in the rest of this slide is I'm going to give you a piece of the Articles of Confederation, and then we're going to talk about kind of why they would do that to kind of understand their perspective, and then talk about the issues that it caused. So no chief executive, no King George Washington, no President George Washington right away. Obviously, he was kind of the guy that people were thinking were going to be there, but did not have that set up. So why would they do that? We're so used to having a national government with some sort of single leader at the top and a president. Why didn't they do it? Well, what did they just get rid of? They just fought a war basically to get rid of a strong national government. And one of the themes that you're going to get through this is the Articles of Confederation was a reaction to a very, very strong national government from the British. So basically, they didn't want to have a repeat of, you know what, let's fight this war for, 6 years and get rid of a king and then just replace it with a king. The movie clips of the Patriot that we watched, there's one we didn't get to where the main character basically says, why should I trade in a tyrant 3,000 miles away for a tyrant 30 miles away or 300 miles away or closer? You don't make a change and then just do the same thing you were doing beforehand. So they didn't want to have a king like King George. Well, kind of think about what's that role of the president now. You can look at, our president now, Joe Biden, or our last president, President Trump, or any president in history, and their kind of role was to act as that leader to try to kind of guide our whole national government. And without that, there was no leadership from the national government. There was no one person who we could kind of say, this is the person we can rely on to get X, Y, and Z done. Now, I will say about presidents, typically they probably get a little too much praise when things go right, and maybe, and honestly, they probably also get a little bit too much negative feedback when things go wrong. I kind of would think of it as, how well do you think a team would do without a coach? Depending on the team, some teams will do really well, some teams might not. And the Americans at this point, remember, this is their first time having freedom and rights, so they're beginners. So what would it like if a T-ball team didn't have a coach? Probably not so good. And that's kind of what happened. They want to do well, but just the way the government was structured didn't allow them to do so. So another form of our government, of the Articles of Confederation, was in order for a law to be created, it had to be ratified by 9 of the 13 states. So at this point in our history, we have 13 states, which means in order to get a law passed, think of anything. Think of, we got to make crosswalks at, that wouldn't be a good rule for 1787. But let's say we just fought a war. Let's say we want to make a law about, letting loyalists back into the country or something like that. In order for that law to become a law of the land, 9 out of 13 states have to do it. That number is close to 70%. Okay, that's a big number to get anybody to agree. 70% to get people to agree. So when we make a law under the Articles of Confederation, people wanted to make sure that it was something that was popular amongst the states. So why would they do this? Again, they want to protect the political power of the states, and they feared a strong national government. They want to make it difficult for the national government to make laws. And when they make laws, they want to make sure that the national government is making laws that the states agree to. So if we go back to that example of the law that we just talked about, that's probably not going to be a law that too many people are going to like, because most people at the end of the war aren't really going to be favorable towards loyalists, so it might not get passed. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves with kind of what impact this would have on the country, but this is kind of the why. They want to make sure, they just got rid of a government that was passing laws and acts that weren't very popular in the colonies. They want to make it so that they have a say and that the national government is in check. It's hard to get 9 states to agree to a new law. So this basic Congress is our national government at this point. Basically cannot really help in too many matters that impact the country unless we have a wild agreement about it. Now think in class I posed this question: what percentage of our government do you think has to agree on something to become a law today? Is it more than 70% or less than 70%? In both classes today, most students argued that it would be more than 70%. In actuality, it's far less. In today's government, you need just one more than 50%. So you need 50.1% of people in our government to agree for it to become a law. Now, there's more stuff that has to happen in order for a bill to become a law, but just in the sheer voting, that's what has to happen. There's some other rules and challenges that have to be made up, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But the main point was they want to make it difficult for the national government to do anything without the state's approval. And again, they want to make sure that the state governments are strong and the other governments are weak. Well, I stopped myself in the last example of coming up with a bill that would be a tax, because Congress could not tax the people directly. They could only ask for tax money from states. Now that's a problem, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on this one, but we talked about how do governments make money to pay for things, typically through taxes. So if the government can't tax, and we know most people don't like taxes. Kind of spoiler alert, the government's not going to have that much money. But again, trying not to get ahead of myself too much with that. Why did they make this? Well, they just fought a war over, taxes that they thought were unfair. It wasn't the fact that the taxes were too expensive. It was the fact that they didn't feel they had a say or a vote. Right? We said no taxation without representation in the parliament. And they, again, go back to our first example, didn't want to just replace, what we used to have with, or what we have now with what we used to have. So they wanted to make sure that the government could not unfairly tax the people the way the British did. And I think this British should be underlined, but most people will see that through. But again, this is coming from a reaction to how things used to be. We don't want to have a redo, and in 10, 15 years have to fight another American Revolution to create a new government. So we talked about it, and this was one of the big issues of the Articles of Confederation government, our Congress, from the time it was created in 1776 to the time we got rid of it in around 1787, is pretty much the national government was having money issue after money issue after money issue because the states aren't going to pay taxes. All right, the national government can ask and ask and ask and ask, but they have no way of making the states do that. Today, in our government, does the national government have a way to make states and people pay their taxes? Absolutely. They have legal ways to do it. They have financial ways to do it. And, we can talk about whether that's fair or unfair today, but that's kind of besides the point. What the main point here is this was a direct result of not paying taxes was the government did not have a lot of money. And let's face it, we talked about this with Britain after French and Indian War. America just fought a war. They are in debt. They are in debt not only states are not only in debt to the national government, but the national government is in debt to the French. They loaned us a lot of stuff. They didn't just give us stuff. It was a loan, and France is going to be looking for that money back pretty darn soon. On the flip side of that, well, Congress also doesn't have the power to raise an army. It has the power to ask the states for troops. Now, this is, again, think about the byproduct. Think about what happened before to make this happen. And this is again a reaction to how things were under British rule, where the colonists basically had no say in whether or not they had troops or soldiers in their towns and in their cities. So they wanted to make sure that if Congress does call troops, that the states themselves can say yes or no to that. And they want to make sure that the national government can't force the states into a war or to a battle that they don't want to fight. So basically, it's kind of stole my own thunder there a little bit. They didn't want a strong national government with a strong army to take away citizens' rights. Remember, they just dealt with in places like the city of Boston, where there was 10 to 15,000 British soldiers in the city occupying the city of Boston for right around a decade, a little bit over that. And under the Quartering Act, it was the citizens' job to clothe, feed, and pay for that. They did not want to have this happen again, not only just in Boston, but in Philadelphia or New York or Charleston or any other city in the United States at this point. And we already talked about the national government has problems with money, so if they do that, it's probably going to go to the states to have to pay for that, and they want to make sure that if the national government is calling up troops, that the states have a strong say in that. So what does that cause? One of our kind of historical, glad that didn't happen, was that our issues with France did not boil over to a fact of war, because we basically had